All right. Good morning, everyone. How are you doing today? We're going to read Part 2, Chapter 5 of 1984 by George Orwell. This will not be a typical reading where I just read all of the words. We're going to talk about interesting vocabulary or interesting phrases as we go. So this will be a very slow process, but we'll learn a lot of interesting words and other things. If you're watching this live, I really encourage you to ask questions and leave comments as we go. Don't think that you're interrupting me. The more you ask questions, the happier I am, because that's the whole point of this. And anyway, it's more interesting and fun when we talk about what we're reading. So in chapter 4, Winston rented a room above a junk shop where he was able to carry on his secret affair with Julia. And that was really what chapter 4 was about. So let's see what happens in chapter 5. Syme vanished. I don't know who Syme is. I guess he's an employee where Winston works. Vanished means to disappear. A morning came and he was missing from work. A few thoughtless people commented on his absence. That word thoughtless means not really considering the consequences of something. So imagine in the environment where Winston works, it would be a very big mistake to make comments about something unusual. Whereas Syme, that would get them in trouble. That's why it's thoughtless. They're not thinking about what's going to happen to them by talking about him missing. So a few thoughtless people, a few people who didn't think about the consequences, commented on his absence. On the next day, nobody mentioned him. On the third day, Winston went into the vestibule of the records department. A vestibule is like an entrance hall or an entrance room. So you could maybe think of that as like the reception for the department. One of the notices carried a printed list of the members of the chess committee, of whom Syme had been one. It looked almost exactly as it had looked before. Nothing had been crossed out. But it was one name shorter. It was enough. Syme had ceased to exist. He had never existed. The weather was baking hot. In the labyrinthine ministry, the windowless, air-conditioned rooms kept their normal temperature. A labyrinth is a maze. And I think he's used that word to describe where he works before. But let's just take a look at what a labyrinth is. Just so you can see. Here's a good picture of a labyrinth. It's a labyrinth. So you see, you get lost when you walk into something like that. So he's describing the office building as labyrinthine, which means that it's confusing and very easy to get lost in the office. But outside, the pavements scorched one's feet. Scorch is like burn. So it was very hot outside. And if you walked on the pavement, that's like the sidewalk or the road, your feet would burn. It was so hot. And the stench of the tubes at the rush hours was a horror. Stench is horrible smell. The horrible smell in the subway was horrible. Actually, I think that word stench, I'm going to use that later. I'll make a video about that word. That's a good vocabulary word. Stench. Horrible smell. Okay. The preparations for Hate Week were in full swing. Another interesting term. Let's put that up here too. To be in full swing. And that means like to be in the middle of something. Something is going 100%. Something has started, and it's really moving along. So we can say our video now is in full swing. That means that we're going. We're really going now. The preparations for Hate Week were in full swing. So they were in the middle of it. They were getting ready for it, and everything was going. And the staffs of all the ministries were working overtime. Processions, meetings, military parades, lectures, waxworks displays, film shows, telescreen programs, all had to be organized. Stands had to be erected, effigies built, slogans coined. Effigy is like an image. So like an image to focus on. So if they're building effigies, maybe it's like a Big Brother, maybe a big statue of Big Brother's face or something like that. Songs written, rumors circulated, photographs faked. Julia's unit in the fiction department had been taking off production of novels and was rushing out a series of atrocity pamphlets. An atrocity is a horrible event. Hi Hadi. How are you doing this morning? I just saw your comment. Vestibule can be replaced with anteroom. It could be. I don't think people use that word anteroom very much. Ante means before, and room, well, you know what that means. So it's like front room or the room before. But I haven't really seen anybody using that word. So I think vestibule would be better. Winston, in addition to his regular work, spent long periods every day in going through. Let me refocus this, recenter it. Files of the Times, the altering and embellishing of news. Embellish is a word that means make it look. It kind of means like decorate it, to make it look more beautiful. If you're embellishing a story, you're adding little things to make it more interesting. They could be lies. I think that's what they're talking about here, embellishing the news. So, the real news maybe is boring, but if you embellish the news, you're making it more beautiful or more interesting. You're probably lying. If you're embellishing something, you're probably lying if it's a story. Items which were to be quoted in speeches. Late at night, when crowds of rowdy proles, rowdy, that's another good word. Rowdy means a lot of energy, acting crazy, making a lot of noise, something like that. Rowdy. So the proles were rowdy. They were excited, they had a lot of energy, they were making a lot of noise. The proles were, let's see, when the crowds of rowdy proles roamed the street. So you can imagine all of the proles making noise, being very excited, having a lot of energy. The town had a curiously febrile air. Now, I don't know what that word is, febrile. We're going to have to look up the definition of that one. I don't think that that's a very common word. Let's see. Febrile. Having or showing the symptoms of fever. Oh, okay. This is kind of the same word. Fever, febrile. You can see it. How are they using it here? Curiously febrile air. But sometimes you talk about fever meaning excitement. So if I'm trying to think of a way to use this in a sentence, using the word fever, not febrile, because I don't think that's a very common word. But Like if people become very angry, they could be working up into a fever, like very hot. So I think that's what's happening here. So the town had a curiously febrile air. There was like a lot of anger, like kind of a sickness, anger in the air, something like that. Hadi says boisterous. Boisterous just means noisy. So if you're thinking about boisterous to replace rowdy, you could, but then that would be the focus would just be that they were making a lot of noise. But if you say rowdy, they're moving around and they're doing things also. It's more chaotic if you say rowdy because it's more physical than just about sound. The rocket bombs crashed oftener than ever, and sometimes in the far distance there were enormous explosions, which no one could explain, about which there were wild rumors. The new tune, which was to be the theme song of Hate Week, the Hate Song it was called, had already been composed and was being endlessly plunged on the telescreens. It had a savage, barking rhythm. Barking is the sound a dog makes. Woof, woof, woof. So you can imagine this is an angry song and it had that sort of rhythm to it. Woof, woof, woof. Something like that. Which could not exactly be called music, but resembled the beating of a drum. Roared, that's a very loud sound. Roar, that's the sound of a lion. That's what a lion does. A dog barks, ruff, but a lion roars. So that's also a very loud sound. If you've ever heard a lion roar in real life, they're very loud. Roared out by hundreds of voices to the tramp of marching feet. Tramping is boom, 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 boom with your feet like that. That's tramping. The proles had taken a fancy to it. That means that the proles liked it. They enjoyed it. And in the midnight streets, it competed with the still popular It Was Only a Hopeless Fancy. The parson's children played it at all hours of the night and day, unbearably on a comb and a piece of toilet paper. Unbearable. To bear something really means like to carry something. So when you say that something is unbearable, that means you can't carry it. Really, the way that we use it is, I can't tolerate it. I don't like it. What was unbearable? Oh, so the children, the neighbors that lived next to Winston, or down the hall from Winston, were constantly playing that song, and it was unbearable. He couldn't listen to it. It was horrible. Winston's evenings were fuller than ever. Squads of volunteers, organized by parsons, were preparing the street for Hate Week. Stitching banners. Stitching is like if you're sewing, this is stitching. So stitching banners, painting posters, erecting flagstaffs on the roofs, and perilously slinging wires across the street for a reception of streamers. Peril means danger. So imagine if they want to hang something in the street, they're going to have to make a string go up in the air from one building to another building. And that could be very dangerous, a very dangerous activity. And slinging is like throwing. So perilously slinging, what was he? Perilously slinging wires across the street for the reception of streamers. Parsons boasted that Victory Mansions alone would display 400 meters of bunting. I don't know what bunting is. I mean, I've heard that word before, but let's see. Bunting. A small... Oh. Well, the only thing that... If you ask Google what it is, it will tell you it's birds. But then if I just put bunting and do an image search, then we can get a better picture of what that is. This is bunting. I didn't know that. I don't know what I would call that. Flags? I wouldn't call it bunting. He was in his native element, as happy as a lark. That's an expression. So when you feel happy and someone says, "Are you in a bad mood?" No, I'm happy as a lark. Just means I'm happy. The heat and the manual work had given him a pretext, a reason, for reverting to shorts and an open shirt in the evenings. Revert means go back. So, adults, in the past at least, didn't really wear shorts. Only children wore shorts. And so him wearing shorts is like reverting, going back to when he was a child. An open shirt in the evenings. He was everywhere at once, pushing, pulling, sawing, hammering, improvising, jollying. Jolly means happy, and they're using it as a verb here. So jollying, I guess, means having fun, having a fun time. Everyone along with the comradely exhortations and giving out from every fold of his body what seemed an inexhaustible supply of acrid smelling sweat. So remember, Parsons is really fat. And so he's running around doing all of these things. So he's getting sweaty and very smelly, very stinky. A poster had suddenly appeared all over London. It had no caption and represented simply a monstrous figure of a Eurasian soldier, 3 or 4 meters high, striding forward. Striding is like walking. Striding forward with expressionless Mongolian face and enormous boots, a submachine gun pointed from his hip. From whatever angle you looked at the poster, the muzzle of the gun, magnified by the foreshortening, seemed to be pointed straight at you. The thing had been plastered on every blank space on every wall, even outnumbering the portraits of Big Brother. The proles, normally apathetic, that means they don't care. So the proles normally didn't care about the war. They were apathetic about the war, were being lashed into one of their periodical frenzies of patriotism. This word lash, that's kind of like what you do with a whip. That's a lash. And to be lashed into something, gosh, I don't know how to explain that. I'm going to have to look up the definition. Let's see. To lash into. Let's see what it says. To assail with stinging words, drive, whip, lash into a fury. So imagine the party wants the proles to be really angry, so they're encouraging them. Come on, be angry. Look at this person you hate so much. That's kind of like a metaphorical whip. Come on, get angrier, get angrier. So they're being lashed into a frenzy. A frenzy is like a crazy, gosh. This morning, I'm not good at definitions. Let's see. Frenzy is like a crazy, acting crazy. Let's see. A state or period of uncontrolled excitement or wild behavior. So the government is encouraging them. Come on, be crazy. Be hateful. That's a complicated sentence. So they were being lashed. Come on, do it. Into a frenzy. They wanted them to go crazy and act crazy. As though to harmonize with the general mood, the rocket bombs had been killing larger numbers of people than usual. One fell on a crowded film theater in Stepney, burying several hundred victims among its ruins. The whole population of the neighborhood turned out for a long trailing funeral which went on for hours and was in effect an indignation meeting. To be indignant is to be like offended. So an indignation meeting, that's like everybody's going there, coming together, and they're all saying, "What? I'm so offended by this." So I think in this case, they're showing this picture of the Eurasian soldier, and the expectation is that the crowd will be very offended and angry about this person, whoever it is. Another bomb fell on a piece of waste ground which was used as a playground, and several dozen children were blown to pieces. There were further angry demonstrations. Goldstein was burned in effigy. So again, an effigy is like an image that you make of something. So they made an image of Goldstein, they made an effigy of him, and then they burned it. Hundreds of copies of the poster of the Eurasian soldier were torn down and added to the flames, and a number of shops were looted in the turmoil. Looting is what happens when there's chaos in the city and people will break the windows of stores and steal all of the merchandise, all of the things in the store. That's looting. Sometimes that happens during riots or sometimes during natural disasters. And turmoil, that's like chaos. Hadi says lash, lambast. I think, well, let me just look at the definition of lambast. You have quite a vocabulary, Hadi, that's for sure. You see, no, it's not really the same because lambast is just criticizing someone in a very hard way. But lashing people into a frenzy, imagine a lash is what happens with a whip. In case you don't know what a whip is, I guess we better take a look at a picture of a whip. Here's a whip. Indiana Jones. See? That's a whip. Indiana Jones holding a whip. So when you're lashing someone, I mean, if you're doing it literally, you're taking the whip and you're doing this. That's giving someone a lash with a whip. But here they're lashing using words. They're like, "Come on, get angry." Whereas lambast would just be like, "You're stupid. I hate you." So that's kind of the difference between those. I've lost my place. One fell on a crowded film theater in Stepney, burying several hundred victims among the ruins. The whole population of the neighborhood turned out for a long trailing funeral which went on for hours, and was in effect an indignation meeting. So it wasn't really that they were mourning or feeling bad for the dead people. They were just gathering to feel offended and angry at the bomb falling. Another bomb fell on a piece of waste ground which was used as a playground, and several dozen children were blown to pieces. There were further angry demonstrations. Goldstein was burned in effigy. Hundreds of copies of the poster of the Eurasian soldier were torn down and added to the flames, and a number of shops were looted in the turmoil. Then a rumor flew round that spies were directing the rocket bombs by means of wireless waves. And an old couple were suspected of being of foreign extraction. So this elderly couple were suspected of being foreign. Had their house set on fire and perished of suffocation. In the room over Charrington's shop, that's the room that Winston had rented with Julia to have their affair, When they could get there, Julia and Winston lay side by side on a stripped bed under an open window. Strip means to remove your clothes. So a stripped bed would be a bed with no clothes, no sheets. It's just a mattress. That's what they mean by stripped bed. Under the open window, naked for the sake of coolness. The rat had never come back, but the bugs had multiplied hideously in the heat. It did not seem to matter, dirty or clean, the room was paradise. As soon as they arrived, they would sprinkle everything with pepper bought on the black market. So sprinkling, that would be like doing this. So I guess pepper was something very rare that Julia managed to buy on the black market. So they put pepper on everything. This is sprinkling. Tear off their clothes and make love with sweating bodies, then fall asleep and wake to find the bugs had rallied and were massing for the counterattack. Oh, maybe the pepper was to make the bugs to prevent the bugs from getting near them. So they were actually sprinkling the room with pepper. I've never heard of that before, but and when it says that the bugs had rallied. Rally means come together for a purpose. It's used for war. It's used for protests. Rally. People come together with a purpose. So here the bugs rallied like an army. They all came together to fight Julia and Winston. 4, 5, 6, 7 times they met during the month of June. Winston had dropped his habit of drinking gin at all hours. He seemed to have lost the need for it. He had grown fatter. His varicose ulcer had subsided, leaving only a brown stain on the skin above his ankle. His fits of coughing in the early morning had stopped. The process of life had ceased to be intolerable. He had no longer any impulse to make faces at the telescreen or shout curses at the top of his voice. Now that they had secured a secure hiding place, almost a home, it did not even seem a hardship that they could only meet infrequently. Hardship means something very difficult. So it no longer was very difficult for them to meet. What mattered was that the room over the junk shop should exist. To know that it was there, inviolate, was almost the same as being in it. Inviolate, that comes from the word violate. So if you violate something, you are compromising it in a way. So something that is inviolate means it's something that you cannot compromise. You cannot ruin it, let's say. So the room was inviolate. It was a place where nobody could see them. Nobody could ruin their time there. The room was a world, a pocket of the past where extinct animals could walk. Mr. Charrington thought Winston was another extinct animal. He usually stopped to talk with Mr. Charrington for a few minutes on his way upstairs. The old man seemed seldom or never to go out of doors, and on the other hand, to have almost no customers. He led a ghost-like existence between the tiny dark shop and an even tinier back kitchen where he prepared his meals, and which contained, among other things, an unbelievably ancient gramophone with an enormous horn. He seemed glad of the opportunity to talk, wandering about among his worthless stock. With his long nose and his thick spectacles, spectacles are glasses, and his bowed shoulders in the velvet jacket, He had always vaguely an air of being a collector rather than a tradesman. So Winston is just making an observation that it seems like Mr. Charrington has this shop because he loves these old things, not so much to make money. With a sort of faded enthusiasm, he would finger this scrap of rubbish or that, a china bottle stopper, the painted lid of a broken snuff box, the pinchbeck locket containing a strand of some long dead baby's hair, never asking that Winston should buy it, merely that he should admire it. To talk to him was like listening to the tinkling of a worn-out musical box. Worn out means when you use something for too long, it starts to become in bad condition. So if you wear your shoes every day for 1 year or 2 years, they will start to look bad because you wear them every day. They start to look worn out. That's a pretty handy word, actually. I'm going to put that up. If I haven't used this word before in a video, I'm surprised because it's actually very useful. Worn out, wear out. That's a phrasal verb. It can be used as an adjective, which means it's used too much. It looks tired. You can use worn out to talk about how tired you are. If you work a very long day and you have no energy at the end of the day, you can say, "Oh, I'm worn out." That means I've been used too much. I'm no good anymore. He had dragged out from the corners of his memory some more fragments of the forgotten rhymes. There was one about 24 blackbirds, and another about a cow with a crumpled horn, and another about the death of poor Cock Robin. It just occurred to me that you might be interested, he would say, with a deprecating little laugh whenever he produced a new fragment. Deprecating means like making something smaller. Well, I'm going to get a better definition than that. I don't trust my definitions today. Deprecating. Oh, well, actually, it says expressing disapproval or disapproving. Yeah, because when you talk about being self-deprecating, that's like saying, "Oh, you're really good," and you say, "No, I'm not good. I'm not good." So, deprecating. Let's read that again. That's expressing disapproval or disapproving. So, what do you think a deprecating laugh would be? I don't know, something like that, I guess. Deprecating little laugh, like, here, look at this. I don't know. Whenever he produced a new fragment, but he could never recall more than a few lines of any one rhyme. Both of them knew in a way it was never out of their minds that what was now happening could not last long. There were times when the fact of impending death, when something is impending, you know that it's coming, and it's always a bad thing. So when something is like, let's see, if you talk about an impending date, it's a date that's coming, and you know that something bad is going to happen on that date. So an impending death is, you know that you're going to die, and you consider that to be a bad thing. And you know it, in this case, they know it's coming soon. The fact of impending death seemed as palpable as the bed that they lay on. Palpable means that you can taste it. Well, let's see. Palpable. Taste it, touch it. I said touch, taste, but they're saying touch. Okay, so you can touch it. So you could almost touch it. They know that the death is coming soon. I don't know if it's the death of their affair or the death of them because of what they're doing, but it was so real that you could almost touch it. And they would cling together with a sort of despairing sensuality, like a damned soul grasping for his last morsel of pleasure. A morsel is like a little piece of something. When the clock is within 5 minutes of striking, but there were also times when they had the illusion not only of safety but of permanence. So long as they were actually in this room, they both felt no harm could come to them. Getting there was difficult and dangerous, but the room itself was sanctuary. It was as when Winston had gazed into the heart of the paperweight with a feeling that it would be possible to get inside the glassy world, that once inside it, time could be arrested. Arrested means like stopped. So time could be stopped inside that paperweight. Often they gave themselves up to daydreams of escape. Their luck would hold indefinitely, or they would carry out their intrigue, just like this, for the remainder of their natural lives. Or Catherine would die, and by subtle maneuvers are like movements, Winston and Julia would succeed in getting married, or they would commit suicide together, or they would disappear, alter themselves out of recognition, learn to speak with proletarian accents, get jobs in a factory, and live out their lives undetected in a back street. It was all nonsense. As they both knew, in reality, there was no escape. Even one plan that was practicable, suicide, they had no intention of carrying out. Carrying out means like to make something real, to put it into practice, to execute it. So they talked about suicide, but they knew that they would never carry it out. They would never do it. They would never put it into real life. To hang on from day to day and from week to week, spinning out a present that had no future, seemed an unconquerable instinct, just as one's lungs will always draw the next breath so long as there is air available. Draw means extract. I mean, I know you know draw meaning make a picture, but draw could mean like take or extract. So to take a breath, to draw a breath, it's the same thing. Sometimes, too, they talked of engaging in active rebellion against the party, but with no notion of how to take the first step. Even if the fabulous brotherhood was a reality, there still remained the difficulty of finding one's way into it. He told her of the strange intimacy that existed, or seemed to exist, between himself and O'Brien, and of the impulse he sometimes felt simply to walk into O'Brien's presence, announce that he was the enemy of the party, and demand his help. Curiously enough, this did not strike her as an impossibly rash thing to do. She was used to judging people by their faces, and it seemed natural to her that Winston should believe O'Brien to be trustworthy on the strength of a single flash of the eyes. Moreover, she took it for granted that everyone, or nearly everyone, secretly hated the party and would break the rules if he thought it safe to do so. But she refused to believe that widespread organized opposition existed or could exist. The tales about Goldstein and his underground army, she said, were simply a lot of rubbish, which the party had invented for its own purposes, and which you had to pretend to believe in. Times beyond number. At party rallies and spontaneous demonstrations, she had shouted at the top of her voice for the execution of people whose names she had never heard, and in whose supposed crimes she had not the faintest belief. Faint means weak. So she didn't even have a weak belief, a small belief in their activities or their crimes. When public trials were happening, she had taken her place in the detachments from the Youth League who surrounded the courts from morning to night, chanting at intervals, "Death to the traitors." During the 2 minutes hate, she always excelled all others in shouting insults at Goldstein. Yet she had only the dimmest idea of who Goldstein was and what doctrines he was supposed to represent. She had grown up since the Revolution and was too young to remember the ideological battles of the 50s and 60s. Such a thing as an independent political movement was outside her imagination. In any case, the party was invincible. It would always exist, and it would always be the same. You could only rebel against it by secret disobedience or at most by isolated acts of violence, such as killing somebody or blowing something up. In some ways, she was far more acute than Winston and far less susceptible to party propaganda. To be susceptible to something means that it can act easily on you. If you know the word vulnerable, it's kind of similar to the word vulnerable. So to be susceptible to the propaganda means the propaganda can act easily on you. It can influence you very easily. If you say, "I'm susceptible to colds," that means I'm always getting sick. I'm always having colds. So colds act easily on me. I'm losing my voice today. Once, when he happened in some connection to mention the war against Eurasia, she startled him by saying casually, in her opinion, that the war was not happening. When somebody says something casually, they say it like they don't care, or like it's not important. The war's not happening. That's casual. As opposed to, that war isn't happening, like they're very serious about it. It's just, the war, that's not happening. Don't you know that? The rocket bombs which fell daily on London were probably fired by the government of Oceania itself, just to keep people frightened. Well, we really are living in this time. This was an idea that had literally never occurred to him. She also stirred a sort of envy. Remember, stir means move around, make something move. So to stir a memory means to make a memory move in your head, to make a memory come out. She also stirred a sort of envy. Oh, she stirred envy. So envy is jealousy. So we'll read what she's talking about in a minute, but she stirred it, meaning she made that come out of him. She made jealousy move inside of him. By telling him that during the 2 minutes hate, her great difficulty was to avoid bursting out laughing. So Winston was jealous of that feeling. He felt discomfort, but he didn't feel the need to laugh at people the way that she did. He wished he could have that. Often she was ready to accept. Oh wait. But she only questioned the teachings of the party when they in some way touched upon her own life. So she didn't really care about other people, apparently. She only became angry at the activities of the party when they affected her. She didn't care about how they affected other people. Often she was ready to accept the official mythology simply because the difference between truth and falsehood did not seem important to her. She believed, for instance, having learnt it at school, that the party had invented aeroplanes. In his own school days, Winston remembered in the late 50s, it was only the helicopter that the party claimed to have invented. A dozen years later, when Julia was at school, it was already claiming the aeroplane. One generation more, and it would be claiming the steam engine. And when he told her that airplanes had been in existence before he was born and long before the Revolution, the fact struck her as totally uninteresting. After all, what did it matter who had invented airplanes? It was rather more of a shock to him when he discovered from some chance remark that she did not remember that Oceania 4 years ago had been at war with Eurasia and at peace with Eurasia. It was true that she regarded the whole war as a sham. A sham is a ridiculous situation, like a lie. Maybe I'll put that word up here. Sham. That's a pretty good word. It's a sham. It's a lie. It's all a big lie. It's a sham. Okay, let's see. It was true that she regarded the whole war as a sham, but apparently she had not even noticed that the name of the enemy had changed. I thought we'd always be at war with Eurasia, she said vaguely. It frightened him a little. The invention of aeroplanes dated from long before her birth. But the switchover in the war had happened only 4 years ago, well after she was grown up. He argued with her about it for perhaps a quarter of an hour. In the end, he succeeded in forcing her memory back until she did dimly recall at one time Eastasia and not Eurasia had been the enemy. So dim is like the opposite of bright. If you have a bright room, there's a room with a lot of light. But if you have a dim room, that just means a little bit of light. Not completely dark, there's like a little bit of light. What kind of pictures can we see with the word dim? I'm sure I've talked about that word before. But it doesn't hurt to remember. Yeah, actually, I think I even used this picture. So you see the bulb on the right is bright, and the bulb on the left is dim. It means not much light. So if you have a dim memory of something, it's like a very weak memory. Not a very clear memory. She did dimly recall that at one time Eastasia and not Eurasia had been the enemy, but the issue still struck her as unimportant. Who cares? She said impatiently. It's always one bloody war after another, and one knows the news is all lies anyway. Sometimes he talked to her of the records department and the impudent forgeries that he had committed. Such things did not appear to horrify her. She did not feel the abyss opening beneath her feet at the thought of lies becoming truths. He told her the story of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, and the momentous slip of paper which he had once held between his fingers. It did not make much impression on her at first. Indeed, she failed to grasp the point. Were they friends of yours? She said. No, I never knew them. They were inner party members. Besides, they were far older than I was. They belonged to the old days, before the revolution. I barely knew them by sight. Then what was there to worry about? People are being killed off all the time, aren't they? He tried to make her understand. This was an exceptional case. It wasn't just a question of somebody being killed. Do you realize that the past, starting from yesterday, had been actually abolished? Abolished means forbidden, made to go away and forbidden. So if you abolish something, you say this is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. So do you realize that the past, starting from yesterday, has actually been abolished? So the party is changing history every single day. So even yesterday is abolished. It's forbidden. It doesn't exist anymore because they reinvent it. If it survives anywhere, it's in a few solid objects with no words attached to them, like that lump of glass there. Already we know almost literally nothing about the revolution and the years before the revolution. Every record has been destroyed or falsified. Every book has been rewritten. Every picture has been repainted. Every statue and street and building has been renamed. Every date has been altered. And that process is continuing day by day, minute by minute. History has stopped. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. I know, of course, that the past is falsified, but it would never be possible for me to prove it. Even when I did the falsification myself, after the thing is done, no evidence remains. The only evidence is inside my own mind, and I don't know with any certainty that any other human being shares my memories. Just as in the instance in my whole life, I did possess actual concrete evidence after the event, years after it. When you say concrete evidence, that's like evidence you can touch, like real evidence that you can touch and show people. And what good was that? It was no good, because I threw it away a few minutes later. But if the same thing happened today, I should keep it. Well, I wouldn't, said Julia. I'm quite ready to take risks, but only for something worthwhile, not for bits of old newspaper. What could you have done with it, even if you had kept it? Not much, perhaps. But it was evidence. It might have planted a few doubts here and there, supposing that I dared to show it to anybody. I don't imagine that we can alter anything in our own lifetime, but one can imagine little knots of resistance springing up here and there, small groups of people banding themselves together, and gradually growing and even leaving a few records behind, so that the next generation can carry on where we left off. And carry on is a phrasal verb, which means continue. I'm not interested in the next generation. I'm interested in us. You're only a rebel from the waist downwards, he told her. She thought this brilliantly witty and flung her arms round him in delight. In the ramifications of party doctrine, she had not the faintest idea. Remember, faint means weak, so she didn't even have a little weak idea. Whenever he began to talk of the principles of Ingsoc, doublethink, and mutability of the past and the denial of objective reality, and to use newspeak words, she became bored and confused and said she never paid any attention to that kind of thing. One knew that it was all rubbish, so why let oneself be worried by it? She knew when to cheer and when to boo. Boo is boo, and cheering is yay. And that's all that was needed. If he persisted in talking of such things, she had a disconcerting habit of falling asleep. When something is disconcerting, it makes you uncomfortable. I'm not trusting my definitions today, so let me just get a second opinion about that. Causing to feel unsettled. Yeah, well, unsettled, uncomfortable. It's kind of the same thing. So if something is disconcerting, it makes you uncomfortable. Let's reread that sentence. If he had persisted in talking of such subjects, she had a disconcerting habit of falling asleep. So Winston always wanted to talk about these things, but if he continued doing it, she would just get bored and fall asleep, and that made him feel weird, like uncomfortable. Why does she do that? That's why it's disconcerting to him. She was one of those people who can go to sleep at any hour in any position. Talking to her, he realized how easy it was to present an appearance of orthodoxy while having no grasp whatever of what orthodoxy meant. In a way, the worldview of the party imposed itself most successfully on people incapable of understanding it. They could be made to accept the most flagrant violations. Flagrant means like not caring that people can see it. Let's get a better definition here. Flagrant, obviously offensive. So that's why I say not caring, because when you do something flagrantly, you're doing it and you don't care how people react. So if you swear flagrantly, swearing, saying bad words like F you, you say it loudly like you don't care, that's offensive to people. But it's even more offensive when it's obvious that you don't care. That's what flagrant is. So flagrant violations, that's like people breaking the rules and I don't care. Yeah, I'm breaking the rules. I don't care. That's flagrant. And that makes people more shocked. Ah, you don't care? You're breaking the rules? Because they never fully grasped the enormity of what was demanded of them, and were not sufficiently interested in public events to notice what was happening. By lack of understanding, they remained sane. They simply swallowed everything, and what they swallowed did them no harm. So people didn't question the rules; they just accepted the rules. That's what they mean by swallow. You know that swallow means like if you drink water, it goes down your throat. If you eat food, it goes down your throat. That's swallowing. But to swallow words means to just accept the words and not think about them. Just accept them without criticizing them. So when he says they simply swallowed everything, they just accepted whatever they were told and never thought about if it was right or wrong. And what they swallowed did them no harm. So they swallowed the words and it didn't seem to hurt them. Harm means hurt. Because it left no residue behind. Just as a grain of corn will pass undigested through the body of a bird. All right, well, that was a short chapter. That was chapter 5 of part 2 of 1984. Next time, we will read chapter 6 of 1984, part 2. Thank you, everybody who stayed and watched, and I can't wait to see you again in chapter 6.